That is really my goal. Help people to understand that they have the ability to be their own doctor. Why are we not talking about phosphatidylcholine? It has these amazing detoxification properties. The way that we live is so upside down. And so I think it's hard for people to wrap their head around that so much of what we're told is wrong.
Welcome to the Wiser Than Before podcast, where each episode will get a little wiser. I'm your host, Josh Dodds. On this episode of Wiser Than Before, we're talking about crucial health principles that are often overlooked. Justine Stenger is a cellular health expert who teaches practitioners and lay people alike that the body cannot return to health until cellular health, and particularly mitochondrial function, is restored. For years, she's been part of a team at a clinic that successfully treats highly sensitive patients. There, they use lipid replacement therapy to restore the membranes of both cells and mitochondria. Quick side note, lipids are fats that make up much of the cell membrane, and there is a specific lipid called phosphatidylcholine, PC for short, which is a key part of our cellular membranes. You'll hear us refer to PC throughout the episode. Justine is an expert and highly sought-out educator in this area, but we also cover some new areas that Justine is busy researching and very excited about. One is circadian biology. Your circadian rhythm is the 24-hour cycle that your body runs on. It controls your daily schedule for not just sleep and wakefulness, but hormone production, energy production, and so much of what goes on inside your body. Justine shares how light and water affect this rhythm and the profound health impacts they can have, along with many other simple things we can connect to in nature. Lastly, we cover how to stay balanced with your mindset and emotions, the key inputs needed to improve your health, and how long you can expect your health journey to take. Enjoy. Justine, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Josh, for having me. Happy to be here.
It's nice to talk with a fellow former athlete who learned that physical fitness isn't the exact same thing as health and longevity.
That is very accurate. I think I was the most unhealthy I've ever been in those years of playing a high level of basketball.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I've heard a lot of like fitness people, bodybuilders say that. I had a longevity doctor on the show a few weeks ago, and he works with professional athletes, and we talked a little bit on a segment, and he just said, that for them at that high level, that they really aren't focusing on health; they're just focusing on keeping the machine going, and then there's a lot of work to do after. And I grew up playing all kinds of sports, but I played soccer in college, and back then it was all about fitness level. Can I run all day? And my view is always like, if I can do these fitness tasks, play at a high level in these games, then I must be strong and fit. And then years later, kind of realized the downsides of that. So I bring that up and point it out because there's so much like true health, deep health, lasting health is a lot different than what you see on the outside, and a lot different than what gets pushed in a lot of our marketing and societal narratives.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually just saying the other day that I feel better today than I think I've ever felt in my entire life. And I remember even just in high school when I was training, so 4 to 6 hours a day, really, and in university, where I just felt chronically fatigued. I don't ever feel like I got to that place where I felt a sense of restoration and rejuvenation. It was just pushing day after day after day. So there's definitely a sweet spot when it comes to exercise. More is not better.
Yeah, definitely. So now as a practitioner, when you're working with patients or clients, what is it that's most important for them to realize in order to get better, and maybe to get better faster?
So I believe that the most important thing for them to understand is that, number one, their body has an innate ability to heal. We are designed to heal, but the body does require very specific inputs in order to restore the health cycle and in order for us to stay healthy. And so my goal is to really empower people in understanding what those inputs are. What do our cells need so that we can restore the health cycle, and understanding that that's completely accessible to them. It's really about each and every one of them choosing to be an active participant in their own health. And that is really my goal, is to help people to understand that they have the ability to be their own doctor. right? We are provided with, when we connect with nature and we provide our body with the proper information through the things that we take in, we have the ability to signal to our cells that they're safe and that they can perform as they were intended to.
So then where do you start with people? Is it, and as far as determining these inputs of what someone needs, is it all the same place, or do you do intake and testing to decide? What's your approach?
So I really act as an educator. I'm not a doctor, and I really make sure that I don't play one. I have the great privilege of being able to work alongside an amazing physician, Bruce Hoffman. And so he does a lot of testing on his patients. And so I'm able to look at a lot of their test results and determine what will help support them specifically on a cellular level. So my area of expertise is in cellular health and mitochondrial medicine, in phospholipids and fatty acids, which I know that we're going to get into here. And so based on specific lab results, like the red blood cell fatty acid test that Body Bio and the Kennedy Krieger lab at the Johns Hopkins University have partnered together to provide for practitioners, the IGL out of Germany, which is showing mitochondrial functioning. It's really an epigenetic mitochondrial test. There's another test called the prodrome scan that we can take a look at phospholipid levels that is really valuable. So when I look at those results, I'm able to really help to educate the patients that I work with around how we can provide the inputs to restore cell membrane integrity, the structure and the function of the membrane, and how that's intimately connected into restoring mitochondrial functioning. And so I love looking at those results. When I work with clients outside of Dr. Hoffman, and I work with many, it's really about an education. And then I tailor the education to the individual based on what they need. So for instance, I teach specific inputs that are required to restore mitochondrial functioning. And that's many. The lipids are one of those essential inputs that are required when we think about restoring mitochondrial functioning. Most people know that the mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell. They're most known as, the energy factories of the cell. And they produce ATP. They also produce water or make water. And so the functioning of the mitochondria is really going to be ultimately determining how healthy we are. And this has actually been proven. There's a researcher, Doug Wallace, who is out of the Children's Hospital in Pennsylvania. And he's one of the leading mitochondrial researchers in the world. And he's actually said that between 90 and 95% of the things that we see today, the conditions that we see today, are of mitochondrial origin. And so it's really about helping people to understand that if we can improve mitochondrial functioning, we can ultimately improve health. And that applies to every single condition really that we see for the most part. And of course, there's going to be genetic conditions that most people are aware of, relatively close to birth. But the majority of these chronic conditions that we see today, we have the ability to move the needle in such a significant way by supporting mitochondrial health. And so that's what I ultimately teach. And as people implement each of these inputs and are consistent with them and understand how these can completely change the trajectory of their health, they become so much more compliant with the recommendations, right? Because as people start to feel better, as their brain fog reduces, as they no longer have, debilitating fatigue, they start sleeping, their brain starts functioning better, they have concentration and memory and the ability to focus. I mean, that is really all that they need to make sure that they're implementing these things on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. If people start seeing those benefits, then it's motivating, right? You're like, okay, I want more of this. I want to feel this way. Before they start experiencing some of those, are you focusing more on the education to get buy-in? And maybe you could cover like the 2 or 3 most common inputs. Are they things that people, typically heard of? Like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to take my vitamins, or are people not familiar with like the PC and other tools you use?
It's actually quite surprising, Josh, that so few people are using lipid replacement therapy, because there's so much data to support using phospholipid therapy to restore cellular health. and and that includes essential fatty acids. And I know there's a lot of fatty acids that get demonized today. Like linoleic acid is the main, essential fatty acid that gets demonized a lot. And I understand why, because it is rife in our food system, and that is poison. It's this oxidized, industrial seed oil that nobody should be consuming. But I think what has happened is people assume that we shouldn't consume any form of linoleic acid or any of these seed oils, and then they avoid them and they end up depleting linoleic acid. And linoleic acid is very important for mitochondrial functioning, because when we look at, so the inner mitochondrial membrane is primarily comprised of phosphatidylethylamine. And that phosphatidylethylamine membrane actually synthesizes its own phospholipid that's unique to the mitochondria, called the cardiolipin. And that cardiolipin is also a phospholipid molecule, but it has 4 fatty acid tails versus 2 fatty acid tails, like phosphatidylcholine or phosphatidylethylamine or phosphatidylinositol-serine. And we want to have 3, ideally, out of those 4 fatty acid tails in the cardiolipin, linoleic acid omega-6 for optimal functioning of the cardiolipin. And the cardiolipin plays so many roles. It helps to support the structure of the inner membrane of the mitochondria. But it's also housing complex 1, complex 3, and complex 4. So when we think about oxidative phosphorylation, where we make energy and where our mitochondria is making water, those protein complexes are actually sitting within the cardiolipin on the ethanolamine membrane. So when you start to see things through that lens, you see how important these membranes are. And so I would say that is one of the most important inputs. I always start with light and dark cycles. So understanding the role that circadian biology plays in orchestrating every single one of the 100,000 biochemical reactions that are happening within the cell every single second. In order for your body to know what to do and when to do it, it needs to know what time it is. And the only way that our body knows what time it is for us to sync our naked eyes with the solar sun. So making sure that we're watching the sunrise and we're getting in as much UVA as we can in the morning. And I usually recommend 60 minutes if possible. It doesn't need to be all at once, but in total until the sun is at about 30 degrees in the sky. And helping people to understand that light in the morning is just as important as making sure that we have total and complete darkness at night. So it's, we're bombarded with artificial light from phones and from computers and from LED lights in our home and from street lights. And there's so much light pollution, and the body needs those signals. And again, light is just as important as darkness. So I really, really emphasize the importance of getting that on point as well. And then I would say the first step after that is helping my clients to understand the role that phospholipids and fatty acids play within the body and adjusting the diet accordingly. I really emphasize a seasonal, local, circadian aligned diet. And we know through Dr. Sachin Panda's work that the timing of when we eat is just as important as what we eat. So that's implemented and brought into place as well. And then I know that I am the biggest proponent of Body Bio's product line. I love the Body Bio phospholipid complex and their balance oil. And those are really recommended across the board for the people that I work with, because they are such essential players in helping to support the structure and the function of the cell. And we need to provide the body with these certain materials in order so that it can actually build, healthy cell membranes. And even though phospholipids aren't considered essential nutrients, they're conditionally essential nutrients. And I see so many people depleted in them today, whether that's because they're not getting enough in from dietary sources. There's so many assaults in our environment that are going to damage our cell membrane, the phosphatidylcholine membrane. So I'll maybe explain this for your audience so they understand. But a cell has 2 biological membranes. There's an outer membrane and there's an inner membrane. And we have about 70 to 100 trillion cells in the body. It kind of depends on listening to. That number varies a little bit. We have 200 different cell types. We have roughly 500 trillion mitochondria. And our cell our body is really all about compartmentalization. So it compartmentalizes from cell to cell with these biological membranes. And we also have that same level of compartmentalization inside the cell with these biological membranes. So our mitochondria has a membrane, our peroxisome, our lysosomes, our nucleus. And if an organelle doesn't have a membrane, it's actually interacting with one. So the membranes are everything. And in order for our body to synthesize healthy membranes, we need these essential nutrients. And we also need to make sure that we have reserve capacity, because the more and more assaults that we encounter, the more damage we are going to incur from the outer cell membrane. So the outer membrane of every cell is rich in phosphatidylcholine, and then we have phosphatidylethanolamine, inositol, and serine in the inner membrane. And so the cell membrane, when we think about everything that's happening on the cell membrane, we have all of our receptors, all of our ion channels, all of our proteins, our peptides. I mean, according to Bruce Lipton, the membrane is the brain of the cell. And he's actually proven this in some of the research that he's done, where he removes the nucleus of the cell. And because the belief was that the nucleus is controlling everything that's happening within the cell. But when you remove the nucleus, as long as the membrane stays intact, the cell can stay alive for weeks after the nucleus has been removed. So the membrane is really like life is on that membrane. And so we want to make sure that we have everything that we need to support the proper structure and function of that membrane. And that's where the body biophospholipid complex shines, because it's providing you with phosphatidylcholine, phosphatidylethanolamine, phosphatidylinositol, and phosphatidylserine to support both of those membranes.
Okay, yeah. So it's the membranes are key. Membranes are a key aspect of health and everything going on in the body. And then this. And are you still affiliated with Body Bio, just for full disclosure?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Now, I do. Yeah, I do education for them. Now, I do education for them because of what I saw clinically. I mean, the whole reason why I went into this field studying phospholipids and fatty acids and membrane medicine was because of their products. Specifically their phospholipid complex. So I do always really want to make it clear that I didn't learn this from Body Bio. This was all my education, was a pursuit of my own based on my fascination with seeing these clinical results. We would have patients come in. We run this really advanced, I mentioned earlier, this test out of Germany called the IGL. And it's an epigenetic mitochondrial test. And we would have patients come in with toxins attached to their DNA. These are called DNA adducts and all these intracellular toxins. And we'd apply lipid replacement therapy, so using the body biophospholipid complex and the balance oil. And within 9 months to a year, we'd see all of the toxins that were in the cell removed. We'd see these DNA adducts removed. And I was so fascinated by and really questioned, why are we not talking about phosphatidylcholine? I mean, it's not only a critical component of every single one of the cells in our body, but it also has these amazing detoxification properties where we're able to naturally clear these toxins from inside the cell and also build reserve capacity, support the person in the meantime. So that was the whole reason why I really wanted to pursue my education in that field from.
Hello, and thank you for listening to this episode. Hope you're enjoying the conversation so far. I want to make a quick note that at this point in the conversation, the recording software on my end dropped, so we got cut off. And it took a few minutes to reboot the studio and get started again. Big props to Justine, who handled that all like a pro and was willing to resume talking from our best guess of where the recording got cut. So if you notice any misalignment, that's what happened. It was on my end. Apologies. And thanks again to Justine for carrying on. And also, I'm going to take this moment to give a shout out to our producer, Bren, who's probably going to have to stitch this together. Bren does an amazing job, makes me and the guests sounds great, does tons of work behind the scenes. So if you enjoy this podcast at all, know that he's a part of it. And thank you, Bren. Without further ado, the rest of the episode recorded flawlessly, and I hope you enjoy it.
And the more and more that I've learned about phosphatidylcholine, the more I fall in love with that molecule, because there's so many benefits outside of just not just, but outside of supporting the structure and the function of the membrane, it's involved in cholesterol regulation. It's a main component of all of our lipoproteins. It supports lipid metabolism. It's, of course, supporting the mitochondria and the ability for the mitochondria to do the work that it needs to do to keep us healthy. It is intimately connected into supporting our brain health. It supports the cholinergic system. There's research showing that phosphatidylcholine can actually support reversing non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And studies on phosphatidylcholine and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease are often done with making no other change, just incorporating the phospholipid complex. So it's a main component of bile. I know I work with so many people that have a really hard time digesting and assimilating fats and oils. And we can use bile support to not only help to make bile and help with bile flow, because PC also helps to support bile flow, but it's also supporting the liver cell membranes, which is primarily where we make bile. And so there's just so many benefits. It's supporting the GI tract. It's the main component of the epithelial cells within the gut mucosa. 90% actually of the epithelial cells in the gut mucosa are comprised of phosphatidylcholine. So when you start to understand all of the roles that it plays within the body, it just becomes one of those things that I don't even call it a supplement anymore, because I really want to encourage people to use whole food as much as possible to support their micronutrient needs. But this is really an essential nutrient, right? I like to look at it more through the lens of this is a blend of lipids that are essential nutrients. And I think everybody on the planet today, living in the environment that we're living in, could really, really benefit from phospholipid support.
Hey there. I hope you're enjoying this conversation. But you know what? I want to bring you even better content in the future. One way you can make sure that happens is by hitting the follow button on your phone in Apple Podcast, Spotify, or whatever app you prefer. Now, if we're being honest with each other, you and I both know there's no way you're going to do this later. So let's take 7 seconds right now, and I'll walk you through the process. Pull out your phone, unlock it, and open Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the listening app of your choice. Now search for Wiser Than Before Podcast and hit follow. In Apple, that's the plus sign in the top right corner. And in Spotify, it's the button with the word follow just below the logo. That's it, you're all done. Doesn't it feel good to cross an item off your to-do list? Thank you for doing that. By hitting that follow button, you are actively bringing better guests and content to this podcast. Now, let's get back to the show. I had heard about it before, but where I really started to appreciate it more was honestly hearing a couple podcasts you've been on, because the more you talk about it and you list these benefits, and where it really pulled me in is, your work that you do. And I know you work with a doctor and, a whole other team really of helping, but you're helping very sensitive patients. And on my health journey, there was a period of time where I was definitely in that category. I was not in a good place. So like reacting to everything, feel like you try everything under the sun and barely move the needle, if at all. And then as I heard you talk about it, it's just very compelling. And it kind of made me think, like, why don't more people talk about it? But then to hear that you use it in your practice with these sensitive patients, and it sounds like you just get fantastic results and you really see those results change, is at least on the IGL test. And maybe we'll circle back and go into a little bit more of what that test shows and what you're seeing there. But after hearing enough of that, then I really started to get more curious, like, wow, this is fascinating. And why, do I hear about this before? Why do you think that is? I mean, obviously you're doing your part to spread the message. But it seems like, why do you think the detox community is missing it? Because that's also where a lot of sensitive patients end up over time, because they try 10 different doctors and specialists, and obviously people do get some results there. But as I spent more time in that world, I realized, there's some amazing benefits. There's some principles that really do need to be followed. To your point, in today's day and age, with kind of the toxic, stressful world we're exposed to, we need to do more than our grandparents did to stay clean and healthy. So I do did find some of those principles helpful, but also there's some pretty out there stuff. Some, everyone's got their own opinions, and it can be, too intense, and I feel can kind of take people down like a hyper focused direction that's good for a part of their journey, but it's not going to do the whole job. And a lot of people spend 2-3+ years going down those roads only to then realize, oh, we need some of these other things like you mentioned, like the circadian rhythm, the light, etc. So do you have any thoughts on why it's not more widely talked about? And regardless if people are missing the boat, can you even cover a little bit more about these like great results you see and why it's such a foundational input that you're putting your clients on?
Yeah. So the first question, I think, Josh, it's hard. I don't really understand why it's so overlooked and why there's this hyper focus on these detox protocols and people taking binders and all these different pills and potions and powders and protocols to try to get them to a place of health, because that's not the way the body works. And again, I understand that we all have our very unique area of expertise. And I really feel passionate about spreading this message, because I think that's part of the issue, is that we all work in these little silos and we all have our little area of expertise. And if we could all come together and share our expertise and talk about what's working and what we see, and I think that we would move the needle so much more when it comes to the chronic illness that we see today. I mean, it's debilitating. It's debilitating our society. I mean, the level of chronic illness that we see today is, I think the last statistics that I read was that upwards of 75 to 80% of people in the population have one or more diagnoses. And the last statistic that I read about metabolic health was that 93% of the population would be categorized as metabolically unhealthy. And that is heartbreaking. That's heartbreaking when intuitively, and even just based on what I've studied, I know the body, that's not in the design. The body is designed to be able to heal when it's given the things that it needs to heal. But we've removed ourselves from so many of those things. I mean, one being nature, the most important thing. And again, that's where the circadian biology principles come into play, because most of us are getting up in the morning, we're turning on the light, we're looking at our cell phone first thing, and we've just completely discombobulated every single thing that's happening on a cellular level. Because that's how devastating it is, right? You look at your cell phone first thing in the morning and it's 6:00 in the morning and you've just jumped your clock to 12 noon in the middle of summer. And there's no amount of pills or potions or powders or supplements that's going to, compensate for that. So I think it's really, it's getting a solid understanding of those inputs that are required and the things that are going to help support your health the most. And that's why I said initially, the light and dark cycles, there's no negotiating that. If people are not willing to make sure that those are incorporated into their day and they're protecting themselves from artificial light and they are disconnecting from technology, because we know that these electromagnetic frequencies are directly damaging our health in so many ways, but we know that they damage our mitochondria. And so part of it, I think, is, to go back to your original question, is just that everything is so upside down. The way that we live is so upside down. And so I think it's hard for people to wrap their head around that so much of what we're told is wrong. So much of what we're told is okay is wrong. I mean, even when you look, I was just talking to a friend yesterday, and I could go on such a tangent with this, because even when you look at the settings in your cell phone, the recommendation is to not touch your phone, to keep it, within an inch away from your body. But in order to use the phone, you have to touch the phone. So it's, those messages, there's just so much disconnect between what we understand to be safe when it comes to these things and the reality. of using things even just like technology. And then, then there's the food system, and there's just so many mixed messages out there that I think it's really hard for people to sift through everything. And so in that, there's this desperation to just look for the next thing that's going to help to heal them. And that's usually, some practitioners saying, okay, well, we're going to put you, on this protocol, or you have mold illness, or you have Lyme disease, or you have whatever parasites. And so we're going to put you on this protocol, and this protocol is going to help to make you feel better and restore your health. And I look at it through the lens of, if you have mold illness and if you have parasites and you have all these things that we label, ultimately that comes down to your redox potential, because your body has the ability to take care of these things when it's in a healthy state. And of course, there's, extremes. If somebody's living in a moldy home and, that it's these chronic exposures are obviously going to eventually damage our cellular health over time. So we do need to make sure that we're in a healthy environment. And I say this over and over again, that the defect is not in the person. The defect is always in the environment. And so for the majority of the time. And so if we don't change the environment that we put our body in, we're not going to be able to provide it with the signals that it needs to heal. And again, no supplement or powder or protocol or IV treatment or hyperbaric oxygen or ozone or whatever it is going to replace your body's need to be in an environment that's conducive to health and healing.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. I remember on my whole long health journey, but especially the really chronic, difficult part, eventually I came to realize, because going back to what you said about how we're all kind of trained to think on what we're told, our immediate reaction to any symptom is like, I need, want to get rid of this. I need to make it go away as quickly as possible. And it's surprising how many times I did that. You'd think after like a dozen times, you kind of get the idea, but it took a lot longer than that. But after years, I started to see it as, okay, this is my body talking to me, or this is a message. And I can either, fight it and try and control it and do what I want to do, or I can, slow down and try and listen, try and gather what's being told. And that, just right there was such a change, such a lifting of pressure, and like instantly helped my health. I feel like it really was a turning point. And then through doing that, it was a lot more focused on, okay, what do I need to give my body? I totally agree with you. The body's never wrong. Like even like when symptoms are happening, this is what I realized with myself. It's like the body's always working for me. My body's always working for me. And so if it's having the symptom, it's like you said, it's like environment or some other effect on it, and it's just doing what it needs to do to survive as good as possible. And it's like if you bought a brand new car and then drove it around the city, just crashing into everything. Be like, why doesn't this piece of junk work? That's kind of what we're doing, and we're hard on our bodies in the modern world. But if we can realize that, or step back and say, okay, how do you put it in this great environment? It's always working for you. So the symptoms are just a sign. Like some aspect of the environment's not great, but I understand why people struggle with that, because so much of it is unseen. You don't see toxins in your air or in the water you drink, or if you don't see the mold spores. Like sometimes this stuff can build up for a while because the body's pretty resilient, and then it turns out you got a whole collection of toxins, or like the EMF you mentioned. Like no one sees that, and it's over such a long timeline, like a progression. Like holding the phone for 1 second. Most people don't feel it. Some people that get sensitive, they can, but most people don't. So it's hard for people to wrap their mind around like, hey, this is having an effect. And if I stack this and 15 more things that have an effect, it's going to start to wear down my body. And then these other things in the environment are going to have more of an impact than they used to. So as far as setting people on the environment, as far as you mentioned light and getting the circadian rhythm, and you said morning sunlight, ideally 60 minutes in the early part of the morning, and then same thing, absence of light at night. Do most of your patients get that, or do you get anybody who says like, nah, can this really make a difference? Because I'll give you an example. Like as I learned about this type of thing, I really bought into it. I'm like, well, that makes perfect sense. Like all of nature, the sun comes up and it's shining. Like, nature doesn't have a choice. And then you just look, if you've ever camped or been out in nature, everything starts to kind of wind down and get peaceful at dusk. And then at night, it's, a lot of the animals are sleeping. So I was like, I'm on board with the idea. But I was so sick. I would go out and get my sunlight day after day. And it's just like, I still felt terrible. It wasn't moving. And when you feel that poorly, you really have to, you really have to strengthen your mind to stay consistent and do these things that make sense theoretically, but might take a while for you to feel. So when you're working with sensitive clients, do you have to explain this to them in any additional way because of that? Or do people tend to get it and then do they see good results if they do it?
So I think, Josh, when it comes to consistency is really key, and it takes between 9 and 12 months to really restore mitochondrial functioning. So it's another thing that I think is important to address is that a lot of people are looking for a quick fix. And if they don't see immediate benefits, then they think it's not working. Now, when it comes to circadian biology, we do see that within 3 days, and this was done on that study where they took people camping, that within 3 days you can restore your circadian clock by waking up with the sun and going to bed with the sun and not having any form of artificial light in your environment. So I do think that when people are really diligent about that they can restore circadian biology very quickly. But again, it's harder when we're not camping, when we're not in an environment that we don't have an option to, pick up a cell phone or look at a computer or watch TV or turn on our lights. So I think that it is to answer your first question, I think it's really important to understand that it takes time. It took a time for your body to get sick, and it takes time for your body to heal. And it is the little things that we do day after day after day to provide our body with those signals that are going to facilitate healing, that are going to make all the difference long term. And so even if you didn't notice a difference going outside and watching the sunrise and, making sure that you're blocking all forms of light at night, I don't buy that long term, because I know that you would feel a benefit long term. It's just that sometimes it takes time, especially when we're so dysregulated too, and our nervous system is dysregulated and we felt unwell for so long. I think that the buy-in, when it comes to those individuals, it's harder to get them to commit to, right? Because again, you're right, you don't feel well. You don't feel like getting up in the morning and getting outside. And I did want to say that for those people, I will have them start with just opening the window, making sure that they're looking out the window first thing in the morning, because there are little steps that we can take in the right direction that are going to get us to where we want to go. But I honestly, at this stage of my journey and my career, a lot of the people that I see, they are so ready to be an active participant in their health. They're so ready to make the changes that they need, and they're eager to learn and they want to understand. And so I don't feel that pushback from a lot of people that I work with anymore. Of course, there's always exceptions to the rule. And ultimately, Josh, those people, I say this with love, but I can only provide a roadmap. I can only provide a roadmap for individuals to take. And ultimately, the responsibility is on the person to actually be an active participant, to implement those things and implement them day after day after day, so that over time, once the body feels safe again, that health cycle can be restored.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we talk about all these strategies and things to execute, but above all of it is attitude. What's their attitude coming in? And you're right. Like if you have the worst attitude or just an attitude where you're looking for something else, then, this type of stuff won't work, because you won't stick with it long enough to be consistent.
And it's also, Josh, falling in, and I don't mean to say, I hope this doesn't sound critical at all, because I don't mean it to be, but there's so many people that end up getting stuck in that victim mentality. And that's, in my opinion, the worst disease of all.
Yeah, it is. Hey there. I hope you're enjoying this conversation. But you know what? I want to bring you even better content in the future. One way you can make sure that happens is by hitting the follow button on your phone. in Apple Podcast, Spotify, or whatever app you prefer. Now, if we're being honest with each other, you and I both know there's no way you're going to do this later. So let's take 7 seconds right now, and I'll walk you through the process. Pull out your phone, unlock it, and open Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the listening app of your choice. Now search for Wiser Than Before podcast and hit follow. In Apple, that's the plus sign in the top right corner. And in Spotify, it's the button with the word follow just below the logo. That's it. You're all done. Doesn't it feel good to cross an item off your to-do list? Thank you for doing that. By hitting that follow button, you are actively bringing better guests and content to this podcast. Now, let's get back to the show. Like when life is going great, it's always the same. It's like it's easy. When everything's going well and it's good, then yeah, of course you have a great attitude. But it's really like when things get hard, when they're not going your way, what's your attitude then? That kind of shows your foundation. But for me, it was so shocking as a person who's like all about mindset and positivity to an extent and these things. Like some of your like deepest survival programs will come up. So there was definitely like some victims, some neediness, and just trying to like swim through that a bit, to recognize it and be like, okay, like can't go there. Or, like what's pretty popular now, growing in popularity is nervous system regulation. And there's all different ways to work with that. I'm sure you have your clients do some of it too. But one of the ways is like, I'll just say like brain retraining, or at a higher level would just be like awareness. So as I did some of that, start to see where my train of thought was going sometimes, especially, some like the worst days over time. Speaking of like reading your symptoms, I ended up being able to really correlate like those heavier thoughts, those lower attitudes with, I don't know if detox is the right word, but just like lack of bile movement. So then I knew if I was having a really poor day, especially mentally, I was like, okay, I got to like support bile flow. And over time, took several years. It wasn't just like right away. I got that dialed in and it was like, okay, if I get this bile moving, then boom, mood lightens. I'm doing more of the right things. I have the energy for it. But it was a wild ride. So all that to say, like, yeah, I totally agree with the attitude. And also, if you're watching this and you're struggling with health, just know like those negative sides can come up. But, and I think just being skillful with it is a big part of the journey.
Well, and a lot of Josh, it's really about, we have to remyelinate the brain, right? So yeah, it takes time and it takes constant redirection when those thoughts come up. And we talked a little bit about this before the recording, but just about the body of water that we are, the body of water that we are, and how our thoughts and our language actually change the structure of water in our body, and how intimately that is connected to our overall health. So that really becomes, when you understand that becomes a non-negotiable. We have to be believing that our body can heal. We have to be speaking life into our body. We need to be constantly reminding our body that it has the capacity to heal, thanking it for symptoms that are coming up, and letting you know that there's something that's out of homeostasis, that there's something that needs to be rebalanced. And yeah, that can be really hard. But again, it's consistency, doing that over and over again. And I know that that a little bit about my story. I don't share a ton about this with my audience, but I mean, I struggled with chronic illness for 20 years of my life. And it's only been within the last 4 or 3, and I feel every day that I make more and more gains in the right direction. But it was recognizing how toxic my mindset was for so many of those years, complaining about why I do all these things that are, health promoting. I try so hard and I still don't feel better. Like, you start to notice these patterns, these conversations that you have with yourself, and how destructive that is to your body's ability to heal. And I've done, this probably sounds super nerdy to a lot of people, but I've really changed my my interest in water has just been, I mean, I'm so fascinated by water and understanding water and how it holds coherence and memories, and how much ability we have to transform the water in our body by drinking intentional water, and doing things like sauna and near infrared light, and exercising that's going to generate electrons. It's going to help to structure water, and being in a bath, Epsom salt bath. So I've really started to implement a lot of these things that are directly related to supporting the water in my body. But one of the things that I've started doing is I structure my water and will intentionally structure it with prayer and gratitude. And then I put these sticky notes on the water, health, healing, whatever word I feel I need in that day, I will stick it to the water bottle. And just that, as crazy as this probably sounds, has totally changed like my whole mentality throughout the course of the day, because I feel like I'm so focused on gratitude and saying thank you. And when you do that, I've just noticed that there's so little room for negativity there's no space for it anymore. It's like in every situation, just really am focusing on gratitude. What can I be thankful for in this moment? And so even for those people that are feeling so unwell, like to really look at, and actually, Josh, this is, I've done a little bit of work with Dr. John Demartini, who is amazing. And he teaches all about equilibrium. Like in every situation, even when we feel like we're being challenged, we're simultaneously being supported. And so it's our job to look for all those ways that we're being supported when we're perceiving that we're in a challenge. And that work has like single-handedly transformed my mental state, because then anytime anything comes up, instead of having an emotional response to this being bad or getting elated when something is, someone is praising you or, complimenting you, and we can kind of get elated in those moments, it's really maintaining equilibrium and remembering that none of these are good or bad. They just are. And there is that sense of equilibrium in every moment, in everything that we go through. And so that's been really helpful for me too, to actually, write those things down. And it's just been repetition, doing it over and over and over again. And then eventually you get to a place where you say, and I said this to my best friend the other day, that I feel like I'm a completely different person than I was five years ago. And so that's just another example of these things take time. It's not going to happen overnight. Things aren't going to transform overnight. And same thing with the lipid replacement therapy. People will take the Body Bio PC for a week and say, I don't feel anything. It's like, well, we have 70 trillion cells, 200 different cell types, 500 or more trillion mitochondria to repair. It takes time. It takes time to heal.
And I think that alone, like you mentioned earlier, it's like 9 to 12 month time frame, like that alone can make a huge difference, because we are operating on such a shorter timeline, just in general, day to day, like everything's instant now. Again, a lot of like the marketing and things and some faster interventions are sold to be that way. So that definitely sets people up for this cycle, just over and over. Try the next thing. Okay. 1 month or 1 week. Okay. Try the next thing, and I don't know why we do it. Well, I was just about to say, I don't know why we do it with our health, like with physical health. You wouldn't expect to go to the gym and have like huge results in a month, but actually people do. And I've made the mistake too. So I think we do it with a lot of things. But yeah, just having a more accurate idea of the timeline can lead to a lot better decisions. But the stuff you were saying about like what you learned in your work with Dr. Martini, that reminds me of some Buddhist principles, or like the Tao Te Ching that talks about the middle path, which is the same idea. Like you're constantly coming back to the middle, and it's on these ends of the polarity that things are so extreme. And the more you can be in the middle, like that's just as true as one of the extreme polarities. And it's a much more, still calm and probably productive place to be.
Otherwise, you feel like you're living on a roller coaster, right? Because I mean, I remember thriving off of affirmations. When anybody would tell me that I did a great job, it's like, oh, I feel so amazing. And then you get, something critical said about you, and then it's this like high goes to this severe low, and you just like are on this roller coaster all day long. And yeah, his principles have really impacted me in many ways, in business, in my personal life. If anyone has not heard of John DeMartini, the breakthrough experience is transformative for sure.
Yeah, and did the gratitude come from him as well? Because I liked what you said. It's really the antidote to what I was talking about earlier, like these negative attitude or defeating thoughts, limiting thoughts, let's call them limiting beliefs. Because the way you said it, it's basically like you just fill up with the good. You just fill your life and your thoughts with the good. And then you don't have to worry about how do I stop all these other thoughts. There's just not room for them, or there's less and less room for them. And I like doing things like that with practical things too, like diet. There's so many opinions and so much information you can get out there. But I'm like, the more you can just focus on what is good, what is good for you, then there's just not room for like the junk food. It's not like I have to fight every junk food or processed food. It's like you could totally fill up a plate or a meal or a week's worth of food with good stuff. So focusing on that, it's just a faster path to where you want to be.
And it's a frequency, right? I mean, this is also where my fascination with water has come in, because those thoughts have different frequencies. And so it's really about what kind of frequency do you want to be on? And those negative, actually, I can't remember the researcher's name. He was out of Russia, and he studied water, and he exposed water to electromagnetic frequencies and toxins and all kinds of things. And he found that human emotion had the biggest impact on water. And so you think about that from a negativity standpoint. And if you're walking around saying, oh, I don't feel well, and oh, this hurts, and I have brain fog, and I'm not sleeping well, and I don't have any energy. Like if that's your language, like think about the frequency that is generating in your body and how that's impacting the water. Again, I think that a lot of people maybe don't understand. I mean, the water that is in your body making up 99% of molecular weight is all of your organelles, your cells, the proteins. I mean, they're all impacted by the structure of that water. And there's researchers that actually think that it's really the degradation of the water within our body that leads to disease. And so if we can maintain, when you look at water as the future of medicine, like if we can maintain that highly structured water within our body, then, that's going to equate to health. And so that's also where I just feel so encouraged about the ability that we have to just change the way that we think about our health and think about our life, and how that impacts the water in our body and ultimately impacts our health.
Yeah. Can you define, or at least like broadly, what do you mean by structuring water?
So I probably shouldn't speak about this. I have a lot to learn. There's a lot more people that are much more eloquent. But there's bulk water, which would be like in a glass. And a lot of people think of water as bulk water. But the water that's in our body is not like water in a glass. It's structured. So it's more viscous. If you think about like Jell-O, right? And we know this by, like, if we cut ourselves like I did yesterday with an oyster knife, that blood gushes out, but water doesn't gush out of our body, right? If we cut ourselves. And that's because of this different stage of water. So we were always taught that water comes in 3 stages, right? Liquid, solid, gas. But there's actually a 4th stage of water. And that water is highly coherent, and it holds memory. And there's these fractals, and there's fractal antennas. And a lot of these researchers think that it's, related to intelligence and our ability to recall and hold information. So it's really fascinating. If you are interested in learning more about this, Dr. Carly Newday's book has single-handedly changed my life. It is so it's an amazing book, and it's written so beautifully. And also Dr. Pollack, Jerry Pollack's book. He's much more well-known when it comes to water research. And then Veda Austin is another water researcher that has had such a dramatic impact on my life, really, and my eagerness to learn more about water.
Yeah, that's what's cool. Like just hearing you talk, you're obviously really excited about this, passionate, like seeing a difference. And it reminds me of what a lot of people do when they come across the circadian rhythm and light. There's so many people that get really into the light because they see how powerful it is. And I love the light aspect because it's free, It's just like we get outside for the most part and then use less artificial things at night. And so it's very empowering. I feel like anybody can go do it. Like it's very accessible, right? And water, I don't know if it's exactly like that, but put it more in the same boat. Like it's pretty, natural, and we're all interacting with it every day, whether you want to admit it or not. So it doesn't use some of the, like 20 bottles of supplements or some of the more advanced technologies, which also are great, but I really love elegant solutions, like simple solutions and things that can be done consistently over time in a sane way. And so I feel like that's another opportunity, another path that people can, go explore for their benefit. I know you're always like researching and learning, and that's part of why you're, you have the audience you do and a growing audience because you're really great at communicating some of these topics that do take some research and understanding. So are you to the point where you're incorporating this as like an input, as like a key habit with clients, or not yet?
Yeah, I am. And I'm actually just in the process of actually doing a little mini course on water because I honestly believe it's more important than food. And that's been a more recent finding. And I'm really, really excited to teach the people that I work with how to optimize water and to really understand why. I think that that's why I'm so passionate about the education piece. And, Josh, it's benefits me too, right? I love learning. And it's so inspiring for me to be able to share what I learn with with the audience that I have. And of course, I'm not always right all the time. And there's a lot of things that I've said in the past that I'm like, you wish you could go back and just change, because you learn, new things and you realize that some of the things that you thought were right in the past are no longer accurate. And that's just the journey. And I have to learn to let a lot of that go. But yeah, I'm really excited to learn more about this and share it with my audience, and also really help to understand. I'm in the process of creating a course right now on mitochondrial restoration, really. It's called the Cellular Cure. And I want people to understand like the roles that phospholipids and fatty acids play in their body, and how we can, even just from, that input, how optimizing that can really help to support. Like all these therapies that you mentioned I absolutely believe there's a time and a place for a lot of these things. It's that we end up handing these things out, as candy to these people that haven't implemented the foundational pieces first. And so we have to have the foundational pieces in place first. And then, we can work on other things. And I've seen this in my work with Dr. Hoffman as well, because he is such a brilliant physician and has the ability to take really complex cases and, put the pieces together. And of course, he has to use therapies, right, and treatments for patients, but he is always educating about the foundational things first. And of course, he's, the whole reason why I got into wanting to learn about phospholipids and fatty acids, because he had already implemented lipid replacement therapy into his practice, when I first met him. And I was able to see his work in action as these patients improved. And I think clinically too, Josh, that using the lipid replacement therapy and getting patients to work on circadian biology, those two things honestly move the needle more than anything that I've ever used. And so when you start to see that too, then it becomes so clear. Like I just got off a call with a client this weekend, and she was telling me that she has suffered with brain fog and fatigue and just no ability to concentrate, no ability to focus on things for almost 10 years. I've been supporting her now for probably about 6 months. And we get on the call yesterday and she says, she really believes it's just the phospholipids, right? Because that's something tangible. She knows that she's been taking these and she's been noticing an improvement. But she was saying how, she never thought that she would be able to get her brain back. And it's like all of a sudden now she's able to read again and she's able to process information like she could before. And she was talking about being at this healing center and there's 4 flights of stairs, and she wasn't able to go up the 4 flights of stairs before because she was so fatigued. And she was celebrating the fact that she went up and down them 10 times just from, going in and out of her room. And that she was just so amazed at how much she's healed over the course of, 6 months of just giving her body some of the things that it needed to heal. And so I believe in these things with all my heart. And that's also where the drive comes from, to really help educate people and help them to understand that, if we don't have a healthy cell membrane, it doesn't matter what supplements you're taking, because the cell membrane is what determines everything that gets into the cell and everything that's removed from the cell. And so if we don't have that in place first, and you want to go and take your urolithin A and your NAD and your B vitamins and your, whatever it may be, it's really just missing that foundational piece that has to come first. And I know that I touched on the cell danger response earlier, but even just when patients are in a cell danger response and the cell has become metabolically inactive, so it's absolutely counterproductive to be giving anything aside from the inputs that are required to restore the health cycle. Because our mitochondria act as our sixth sense. They're always detecting threat. They're looking at our environment, assessing what's coming in. And when, they perceive that the toxic load exceeds their ability to maintain homeostasis, that's when they enter this, what Dr. Robert Naviaux has coined as the cell danger response. So it's really about restoring the health cycle. And then we can implement some of these other things that are going to really help to leverage health even more. But the things that I have seen help the most are really the quantum biology principles and the phospholipids, the lipid replacement therapy.
Can you just run through the PC, like how you use it? Anyone who's listening, especially if they're new to it or now just, understanding its power more, how you use it, the timeline, and, any clinical pearls, like if, for sensitive people or if there's other things to watch out for to help people get the best use out of it.
Yeah. So it's good that you brought that up, because for sensitive people, because phospholipids have so many different characteristics, you do want to really start low and slow. Oh, and I would recommend that for across the board for sensitive people. But they do act as signaling molecules, so that can stir some things up in the body. One of the signaling properties that they have is related to gut motility. So some people will experience diarrhea or constipation. There's also the potential for these phospholipids to act as signaling molecules to the mast cells, which can degranulate because the mast cell holds these chemicals within the outer cell membrane. And when the mast cell degranulates, it can release actually up to 1,000 different chemical mediators. So that can really stir a lot of things up, kind of causing symptoms in multiple systems in the body. So low and slow is key. You always want to take phospholipids with protein. Same thing with fatty acids. That's really important. I personally recommend taking them in the first part of the day, ideally at breakfast. And that's largely because I really promote a large protein and fat breakfast to support circadian biology, to support leptin, to support metabolism, because we know that in the first part of the day, we have the best metabolic fire. We have the best ability to digest and assimilate the nutrients that we consume. And so those are things that I think are important for people to know that are sensitive. the phospholipid complex does contain a little bit of ethanol, and people that are highly, highly sensitive, specifically who have mast cell activation syndrome, can sometimes react to that, or it could be, a nervous system reaction as well. But wherever it's coming from, some of those people can react. So I do think it's important to let the PC sit out. You can put it in a little bowl over some warm water to let the ethanol evaporate out, and that works really well for those people that are highly sensitive. Aside from that, I need to be careful about giving any dosing recommendations. I don't want it to be confused as medical advice at all. So that is something that, a practitioner would guide someone around based on their body weight, their size, their state of health or disease, metabolic demand. I can say that the typical dose that a lot of physicians use for a therapeutic dose is usually anywhere between 1 and, up to 3 or 4 tablespoons. So it's a hefty dose of these lipids. And of course, you would want to work up low and slow and work with a practitioner to help guide you through that. And it takes between 6 months and a year to restore mitochondrial function. So you usually need to stay on that higher dose for a good duration of time. And then after about a year, you can usually come down. I still recommend staying on a maintenance dose so you never run out of the need for these phospholipids. The body biophospholipid complex is one thing that I would say is something you want to take long term. We need it more as we age because we have more inflammation, more catabolic reactions, more oxidative stress. We have a decreased ability to synthesize phospholipids as we age. Women, especially as estrogen drops, that can really compromise the ability to synthesize phospholipids. So we need them more as we age. We need more support generally as we age than we do when we're younger. So you would want to dose that according to where you're at in your health journey.
All right. Well, I could go on and on, but I'll respect our time here. If you want to work with Justine or follow more of her content, we linked to her Instagram and website in the show notes. She's on Instagram at Justine Cellular Nutrition. That's all together, no spaces, dots, or dashes. Justine Cellular Nutrition. And her website is justinestenger.com. JUSTINESTENGER.com. And just want to say thank you for coming on, for sharing your knowledge. It was great to hear also some of the things you're excited about now and looking into, and appreciate what you shared with everybody.
Oh, thanks, Josh, for having me. It was really nice to spend this hour with you.
Hey there. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you feel you're walking away wiser than before. I want to bring you even better episodes in the future. One way you can make sure that happens is by rating this podcast. The more of you who rate this podcast positively, the better guests I can bring you. Since you and I both know you're not going to do this later, I'll walk you through the 10-second process right now. All you have to do is follow along. Take out your phone and unlock it. Open up Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever app you listen on, and search for Wiser Than Before Podcast and click on the show. In Apple Podcasts, you have to scroll down towards the bottom, past the most recent episodes. When you get to the ratings and reviews section, click on the blank stars to rate. In Spotify, beneath the logo and name of the show, you'll see 3 horizontal dots. They're just to the right of the bell and settings icons. Click those 3 dots, and the second option is to rate the show. Hit the blank stars and fill them in. All done. You can cross that off your to-do list and start looking forward to even better episodes in the future. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week, even wiser than before.